chapter 16. This is in Philippi with the Philippian jailer, and well, this is where the second half of this, and this is where they're going to be in prison. But right before that, this is when the girl had the demon, and Paul cast out the demon. And if you remember, there was an uproar because this girl, made a lot of money for the demon possession caused her to be a soothsayer and made a lot of money for her owners, and so people were upset about it. But if you look in verse 18, it says, "This she did for many days," is proclaiming about Paul in verse 17, saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High God who proclaim to us the way of salvation. And this she did for many days, but Paul, greatly annoyed," my translation, "turned and said to the Spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out that very hour." And we ended last week talking about how that Paul didn't cast out this demon immediately. He waited until it just was too much for him to bear. And whether, the word annoyed here is a translation of the New King James, and it's kind of unique in the way it translates. The King James doesn't even translate it that way. Others say distressed or something related to that. So for whatever reason, whether it's because the demon was annoying him or this girl was distressing him because he knew that she was upset or being used in this way, or maybe a little bit of everything, he decided finally to cast out this demon. And we talked about last week the problems that he knew it would cause, and why he would wait instead of doing it immediately, that kind of thing. And there's some kind of a balance that he was trying to strike. So, it's the best that I can figure out, and everyone else seemed to be in agreement with that as we went into it. And so now we have, looking at at the question in verse 20, it says, "They brought them to the magistrates and said, These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city." This is verse 19 says, "When their masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. They brought them to the magistrates and said, These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city." What is the implication of the way this is stated when it says "these men being Jews"? What does that imply? They're Jewish, though they're troublemakers. Okay, that does show some kind of as we get into the next section here. It's going to be more related to the fact that they're not Romans, so that will be something but there's no that the Romans saw the Jewish people as troublemakers in a lot of cases, and so that's part of what's going on here. But also, if you look at the next question here, why would there be a charge brought up against them for teaching customs that are not lawful for us, being Romans? That was what is being said here in verse 21. They teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or to observe. Why would that even be an accusation? Does anyone really know why? What's going on here with that? Yeah. So yeah, they're not for Roman citizens to follow. So that was a Roman town, Roman garrison, which was an important part of that, and it's part of this whole Jew situation here. But the reason it was brought up because Roman law stated that recognized religions could be observed by any citizens of Rome, of the empire, but a Roman citizen himself could never be approached by someone not a Roman citizen and tried to proselytize them. illegal for a Jewish person to go and try to convince a Roman to become a Jew. It was illegal. And this is part of the accusation that's being made. And so here's an interesting situation. Who is it that Paul is talking to, has been speaking to at this point so far? Where has he been preaching? In the synagogue. And so, well, at least he's been speaking to the women there. There wasn't a synagogue, evidently, but he's speaking to the women with Lydia and her household and all that in verses 11 through 15. So he's not focusing on Roman citizens, but the accusation was he's trying to get us to say some things to believe something that we shouldn't believe. It's not lawful for us to believe. And so there's part of the accusation. And this is something that is going to be a tactic that from this point on, the Jewish people that are persecuting Paul and giving him trouble, they kind of key in on this, and they from here on out, we're going to see most of the time when they are bringing up problems, the Jewish people are going to go to the magistrates, they're going to go to the authorities, and they're going to make accusations, not the same kind of accusation, but they're trying to bring in the law. They're trying to bring in the Romans into this more and more after this. So we'll see that as we go. And so it says here that they teach customs in verse 21. And verse 22, when the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. Having received such a charge, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. Okay, so now they tore their clothes off and beat them, and we're going to see that this is going to backfire against them. Beat them with rods. What was the purpose of stocks? To immobilize them, yeah. You know, I used to think that when I drew pictures in class, when I colored my pictures in class, in Bible class, they always had their feet in stocks, sitting in front of them. Just had a little piece of wood covered on the top of them with holes for the feet. I remember it had a little a hinge on one side and a lock on the other side. Y'all remember coloring that as a kid? And learned since then they generally they had locks on either end, so they may be a piece of wood about this wide, and they locked their feet like that. They spread them out like this to be as uncomfortable as possible. And so this is probably the situation that they were in, and it certainly wasn't a pleasant thing. It wasn't comfortable by any means. It was obviously to keep them from getting away, and so it really was kind of almost a little bit of a torture at the same time. So in looking through this even more, it says that they put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. But at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were loosed. And the keeper of the prison awakening from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Paul called with a loud voice, saying to him, "Do you yourself no harm, for we are all here." And he called for a light, ran in, and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. All right, so why would Paul and Silas be singing at midnight? Isn't that? I know it's strange, and we've all read this, but why would they be? Wouldn't you be trying to sleep? Is this scene cutting in and out? Give me some more batteries, maybe? I'm not sure what the problem is. like you can't hear me with it. Maybe this will work better. Should I hold it up like this, maybe, so it can transmit up back there? I don't know if that thing is moved or what. Is there something in front of it? I don't know. Okay, it seems to be working now. So yeah, it could be that they were uncomfortable from the stocks and they just not going to get much sleeping in anyway, right? I don't know. I've often thought myself. Have you ever asked this question? Would I be singing? Would you be singing in there? That's not my first thought, right? I'd be just at least whining a little bit, you know. And I'm not saying that that's what I should do, but man, this is a great example, isn't it? That here they're in a situation, and what's happening when with the people that are around? They're listening, right? So what do you think that they're singing? What does it say that they're singing? Does it say anything? They're singing hymns. Yeah, where do you think these hymns are from? Probably, yeah. Hymns that they're already accustomed to. And they probably were singing them in the language that was common, right? Would have been Greek, evidently. So they're singing these hymns, and people are listening, right? That is something that is amazing to me in one instance, and in one just thinking about it like that. But also in the fact that when that earthquake came, the doors are all opened, right? Have you ever thought about prisoners inside a jail and all the doors open and they just sit there? That's pretty odd, isn't it? Why wouldn't they leave? Paul, it had something to do with them, sure, but what could possibly have prevented these people from saying, you know, here's my chance? Holy Spirit, yeah. There was something about this, obviously, that made everyone pause, right? It's like, wait a minute, there's something weird going on here. And so they were afraid to leave. Some of them could have thought they were having a dream. Who knows? I don't know what the hymns said. I'm wondering if the hymns said anything about calling on God to save them, or, you know, I'm thinking Psalm 23, or, you know, all kinds of things come to mind that could be stated. And so for whatever reason, the people that were there listening, they had the common sense enough to know we need to stay where we are. There's something going on. And, you know, it's just a lot of speculation, but I wonder how long that this went on. If the people were listening long enough to have a lesson that would tell them they needed to stay there, they had to be listening for a while. So I don't, like I said, I have no idea. It's just interesting how it all happened. And Paul called out with a loud voice, says, "We're all here, so don't harm yourself." And why would the keeper of the prison think about killing himself? Yeah, so he probably thought that would have been better off than what was about to happen to him. Yeah, so he would just go ahead and kill himself and get it over with. And what do we know about this jailer? Did he have family? Evidently, he had a household. So this would have been bad on several fronts. But here they are. Okay, there's no one escaped, which is very odd in itself. And so he called for a light and ran in and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Why do you think he went to Paul and Silas? There's something there, evidently in the singing, or maybe it's the fact that Paul called out. The jailer evidently recognized that Paul and Silas had something to do with this somehow. And so there, like I said, there's a lot more going on here than we're actually told by Luke. But we have enough to know what happened, and there's faith that evidently is built up to a certain degree. He ran in, and he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. That's an indication that he recognizes they had some power in this. They had some kind of something to do with this. Yeah, okay, where did it say that? Singing hymns and, praying and singing hymns. Yeah, I mean, that's right. It could have been out loud. It seems like that would have been the case. So that though they were evidently giving some information, right? That everyone put two and two together. And sorry? Okay, yeah, especially with everything opening up like that. I don't know how common earthquakes there, but you ring all that does play in together, and so yeah, you're right. And it would make sense that everyone had fled, but Paul said no, and to not kill himself because they're all still there. So he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. And in verse 30, he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" All right. Now, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? What was he trying to be saved from? But yeah, okay, the Romans, but no one had left. So why would he think that he was going to be killed by the Romans? Right. Okay. So he would have heard a little bit of what was going on, and he would have known about them and their teaching. Probably, they at least know the accusation. The accusation was these trying to get us to follow something that's not lawful for us to follow, customs that are not lawful for us to follow. So it could be he knew a little bit about it already, and he also knew that they were beaten. Right, they were beaten with rods. He may have even had a part in that. I don't know how much. They did have people that were. Could you imagine this? They Soldiers have different duties, right? One soldier was called a lictor, and you can imagine what his job was, to give the licks. That was his job, and they were very good at what they did. And so they probably had a guy come in and beat him with a rod. This is the lictor, and that's incidentally where have you ever heard about getting licks at school? That's what it comes from. The Romans were good at it, and they took pride in hurting people pretty badly. Anyway, so what they would do is they would just beat you until they were tired. I mean, they didn't have a limit. The Jews had a limit. It was 40 minus 1. Or was it 39? They could do 39. The law said 40, so they always goes to 39. But the Romans would just beat you until they were tired of it, and so they generally got people that like to do it, and so this is the condition that they're in. And so he knew that, and he knew that they went in, and he knew that these evidently were singing and praying to God, singing praises, probably had a lot to do with maybe even I would imagine these hymns had something to do with Jesus. And so there's a lot of things going on that he could hear them talking about these things, and all the prisoners could too. And so it's pretty obvious then that whatever they are all they're all aware that there's something special and unique here with these people. And so he comes in and says, what do I need to do to be saved? And they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved, you and your household. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. Immediately he and his family were baptized. And when he had brought them into his house, he set food before them, and he rejoiced, having believed in God with all his household. All right. So here's the situation. He comes, okay, what do I need to do to be saved? And he said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you'll be saved in your household. Why did he tell him to believe? Why did he tell him to be baptized? Right. Right. So, and here's the thing with that Luke does in the book of Acts. Anytime that you read, if you look, following on here, it says in verse 34, the very last phrase says, having believed in God with all his household. That phrase there, having believed, is used several times by Luke in the book. And in every instance, this is always referring to people who have believed and repented and were baptized. And he calls that having believed. So he links all of that in together with believing. And that's one of the ways that you can see that in the book. You can see it over and over. In fact, he doesn't. When would you say then that he actually started believing in Jesus? Before he took them and washed their stripes, or maybe after he took them and washed their stripes? And how would you know that? Right. Yes. Yeah. Because after he came in and fell down and so told him to believe, if he decided, I'm not going to believe in Jesus, why would he take them and wash their stripes? Why would he do anything with them? So there was belief there already, but then it doesn't say, and he rejoiced having believed then. It says he rejoiced later on after his family was baptized. He and his family were baptized. And it says he set food before them and he rejoiced having believed in God with all of his household. So we're not seeing a contradiction here in any way. We also see that they were baptized, but belief is emphasized. And somebody explained it this way one time: if somebody came to you and asked how you can go from here to Abilene, and you said you've got to go through Fort Worth, right? You go down, hit 20, go through Fort Worth, and keep going. And then you ask someone in Texarkana, and they said, well, you got to go through Caddo Mills. I know you don't have to, but you see what I'm saying. They gave them different directions based upon where they were. And the starting place was this man had to believe. He had to understand what they were saying and choose that belief. So that's, I think, is where you start. How long did it take for the jailer and his family to be baptized? Not. Do you remember? Have you ever read anywhere in the New Testament where they said, "Let me give it a month"? No. Never. Why is that? Yeah, you act on it because what happens if you don't act on it? Oh, you could say, yeah, I guess you could make that accusation. Yeah. Any other reasons? I'm going to tell you what, I've run into people now and then that like, uh, I ran into someone, I was studying the Bible with them, and they're like, I need to be baptized right now. So, are you lost? And they said, yeah, I'm gonna, if I died right now, I'm going to go to hell, but I need to wait until I can get family around. I said, why would you want to wait? They said, because they want to see it. And that can just, it kind of boggles the mind for me. I guess maybe they had a little more faith that they were going to be okay than I would. But you never see that in the New Testament. They're always like, okay, right now, this needs to happen because it's a matter of now I'm lost and I need to be saved, right? So there's definitely urgency in the New Testament. And I think it's good for us to teach that urgency. It's good for people to recognize that. And I mean, I understand that sometimes there are some situations that people need to wait. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm simply saying that there should be some urgency to it. And I think we need to ask questions if they're wanting to wait a month or 6 weeks. I would ask some questions like, do you really think that this is even necessary? But that's just my opinion. In verse 37, well, let me read here a little bit further. When it was day, the magistrate sent the officers, saying, let these men go. So this tells us that the jailer was baptized and then stuck him back in prison. Why did he do that? The jailer is going to be in a lot of trouble. Yeah, exactly. Right. So they don't want to be escaping. They're breaking the law. They don't want to get this man in trouble either. So he says, let these men go. Let those men go. So the keeper of the prison reported these words to Paul, saying, the magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace. But Paul said to them, they have beaten us openly, uncondemned Romans, and have thrown us into prison. And now do they put us out secretly? No, indeed. Let them come themselves and get us out. All right. So why would Paul refuse to leave? And this would have been humiliating to force these people to come down and ask them to politely escort them out, right? Why would he do that? You think it? Let me put it this way. Do you think that Paul said, you know what, I have got something on them, and I'm just going to humiliate them because I'm mad because they beat me? Is that what's going on? He had some reason to do it. He's definitely making a point. Yes. What's the point that he's making? Yeah, he is showing that they're honoring him now, and which they should not have. Okay, we know that they couldn't. That's right. They shouldn't have beaten him. Yeah, but he's had other places where he went and they beat him as well, but he didn't say anything about it. Yeah, Joe came in just for this. Oh, I agree. So you couldn't. They were breaking the law. I didn't know they would be put to death for it, but that's true. I mean, I knew they were breaking the law, and he made note of that. So why didn't he just leave quietly, and why did he make them come down and escort him out? It wasn't against the law for him to just leave and not press charges, right? It wasn't. What was the atmosphere of the environment of the city toward Paul and the other Christians? Very antagonistic. Right, because now instead of being antagonistic against Paul and his people, quote unquote, what is he showing? Hey, you owe me here. I could have you in a lot of trouble, but I'm not going to be. I think it was a power move, and it wasn't for his benefit. It was for the Christians' benefit. So that's my opinion, and it makes sense when you think of it that way, because the Romans, they were terrified when they figured it out. The magistrates, it says in verse 38, they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans, and they came and pleaded with them and brought them out and asked them to depart from the city. At one point, it was tell them to get out of here, and then it's no, please, please, will you please leave? That's a different tone now. And how do you think that they're going to treat the other Christians there? They're not going to be nearly as antagonistic as they were before. So I think it was a stroke of brilliance. Yes. Yes. Yes, it did. And if you read the book of Philippians, it seems like they thrived in that area. They had a lot of good things going for them. And so there were, I mean, I'm sure they had their problems still, and it didn't cure everything, but it seems like it was a pretty good move on his part. And there may have been other things. I'm simply giving what it seems to me that to make the most sense is when he's trying to do this. But he humiliated them, but it wasn't out of being antagonistic toward them. I think he had a deeper purpose of that. And so, who made up the church in Philippi at this point? Whenever Paul leaves, who's the church? We have Lydia and who else? Her family, and the Philippian jailer and his family, and maybe some other people that before they left. Right? She had a house. Lydia had a household. There would be servants in there as well, and the Philippian jailer possibly had some other people involved. It says all who were in her house in his house in verse 32. So it's a small congregation, isn't it? And he's trying to help protect. And I think that's a pretty good way of looking at it. All right, any comments or questions in chapter 16? Did you come in for a be in big trouble? Oh, okay. Yeah. And this isn't the only time that Paul's going to use his Roman citizenship. He'll use at least one other time. But he didn't just walk around saying I'm a Roman citizen. He used it strategically, right? And he didn't mind suffering, but he also wanted to help the church. So thank you for clarifying that. All right, so let's look then at it says in verse 40, they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia, and when they had seen the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. So he got them all together again, and then he left. And then chapter 17. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there were a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, saying that this Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ. And some of them were persuaded, and a great multitude of the devout Greeks, not a few of the leading women, joined Paul and Silas. Okay, in verse 1, what do the pronouns tell us about Luke? He's not with them. So where was the last time we saw Luke? The last time we saw Luke was, we see that in chapter 16, verse 11. Sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace. And so it says, from there to Philippi, which is a former city, and when we were staying in that city for some days. The last time we saw Luke, he was in Philippi. And then he says, Paul, they went. So where is Luke now? In Philippi. He stuck around. Why do you think Luke would stay around in Philippi? Yeah, right. He probably was helping the church. It doesn't say that, but it makes sense. Either that or he could have, maybe he had a friend there. I don't know. It doesn't say. But it is interesting that he's there. We're going to see some things here and there of Timothy in being in different places and Paul leaving things, and you just kind of have to pick it up in different areas. And it's amazing. It's pretty neat how it all puts together. But they pass through Amphipolis. Amphipolis is about 30 miles from Philippi, and then about 30 more miles from that is Apollonia, and then 37 or so miles from that is Thessalonica, and there was a synagogue of the Jews. So there was evidently they went as far as they could. Those were 30 miles or so, would have been probably a day's journey. And remember, it hadn't been very long since Paul and Silas were beaten with rods. So I don't know how far do you walk in a day if you've been beaten with rods? I don't know if they made it in one day or not, but it's a day's journey normally. So they would stop there at these places and this evidently keep going. And the reason they didn't stop for long evidently was because Thessalonica, there was a synagogue there. Maybe they knew that there was a synagogue, so they were going on. And so Paul went into them for 3 Sabbaths, reasoned with them from the scriptures, reasoning and demonstrating and explaining that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. Okay. How long was it there that it says that he spent with them? In verse 2. 3 Sabbaths. Why did he go in on Sabbath? That's when the synagogue would be open, right? Yeah, that's when they all get together. So he would use that time to preach. And it wasn't very long, 3 weeks basically. And the Jews were not persuaded. In verse 5, the Jews who were not persuaded became envious, took some of the evil men of the marketplace, and gathering a mob, set all the city in an uproar and attacked the house of Jason and sought to bring them out to the people. Okay, so how long did it take for them to have these problems come up? About 3 weeks, right? It didn't take him very long at all. And this is typical. So he goes into the city and causing problems. Within 3 weeks, there's already an uproar. And so these, because of envious Jews, went into this. So he's in Thessalonica. He spends a few weeks with them. And then he's going to have to end up leaving very quickly because of this. Look in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. You might want to keep your finger here. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. I want you to notice what he says to them after just a few weeks spending time with them. Chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. He says, "We give thanks to God always for you all, making mention of you in our prayers, remembering without ceasing your work of faith, labor of love, and patience of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ in the sight of our God and Father." All right, so he's already recognizing them for being hard, diligent workers. Now, this was later, so he had already received some word about them. But look at how he feels about them. In a very short time, he's built this relationship. Chapter 2 and verse 8, he says, "So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil, laboring night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you. We preach to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe. As you know, how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you should walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory." So after a few weeks, he had relationship with them where he says, I've treated you like my own children. That's pretty amazing that he could do that in that to that. Is that the first bell? Huh? First bell. That's pretty amazing. Look at also in chapter in verse 19. For what is our hope, our joy, or crown of rejoicing? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that is coming? For you are our glory and joy. And then chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. For what thanks can we render to God for you, for all the joy with which we rejoice for your sake before our God, night and day, praying exceedingly that we may see your face and perfect what is lacking in your faith. All right, so do you see here the connection that he has with these people in Thessalonica? How his heart is just full because of these people. And again, he spent 3 weeks with them. What does that suggest about the people, and what does it suggest about Paul and his approach? What does it suggest about the people there, first of all? Yes, they were sincere, dedicated, and devoted from the very beginning, right? And what does it say about Paul? He does love them, sure. That says a lot about him, doesn't it? How long does it take you to get to where you have a full, open relationship with other brothers and sisters in Christ? It takes a while, doesn't it? Probably more than 3 weeks. This man's heart was wide open. You know, whenever I grew up, it's significant. Whenever I grew up, for some reason, I had it in my head, Paul was a cold, callous man. I don't know why, but I guess that's why the way he was preached. And his letters were preached that way. And it's just facts. You know, he's scolding people. He's being sarcastic sometimes. He didn't have an open heart. And it wasn't until I actually went into preaching school and I read 2 Timothy and studied 2 Timothy that I realized this man had a heart of gold. This man was wide open. And he loved people with all of his heart. It was incredible when you look at the way he talks about Timothy like he's his own son. And then when you read this and you realize, man, he spent just a few weeks with them, and it could have been a little bit longer than 3 weeks because of there may not be everything here. And he's also had time to reflect on and send messengers back and forth. Sure, but he spent 3 weeks with them basically, and he feels like family. That's incredible to me. And it just shows you the intensity that he worked, I think. Yes. In fact, he said, I worked with you night and day. He spent all of his time with them. That's the secret to it. And you're right. If you spent that much time with Christians, that'd be very different. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by being here on Sunday morning, and that's it. Or even Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, and that's a disservice. So, all right, we'll start picking up there around question number 6 next week.